Two stories, one strike, how the US and Iran spun the same missile crisis. In this video, we're going to unpack how two powerful nations, the United States and Iran, interpreted, framed, and retold the same international crisis in completely different ways. The event? A US airstrike targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure and Iran's subsequent missile retaliation on an American military base. You might think the facts are the facts. Bombs fall, missiles fly, statements are made, but the stories each side tells afterward, those are shaped by politics, power, fear, pride, and above all, audience. Because in the battle for international opinion and domestic loyalty, narrative is everything. Let's take a deep dive into how each country crafted their version of events. Not just what happened, but why they say it happened, how they say it happened, and what they left out. But before we start, I'm on a road to get 1,000 subs as a small channel. If you want to help me, then like, subscribe, and enjoy watching this video. Thank you. Before we break down the dueling narratives, let's establish a basic timeline of events. Tensions between the US and Iran had been steadily rising over Iran's nuclear program. According to American intelligence, Iran had accelerated uranium enrichment and was possibly weeks away from crossing critical thresholds outlined in the now-defunct JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that the US withdrew from in 2018. In response, the United States launched what it described as a limited and precise airstrike on Iranian nuclear infrastructure. The strike targeted enrichment facilities and research labs using bunker-busting munitions. According to Pentagon officials, these strikes were surgical, causing significant structural damage to nuclear sites, but, critically, no civilian casualties. Within 48 hours, Iran retaliated, firing over a dozen ballistic missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which houses US and coalition forces. No American casualties were reported, and most missiles were intercepted or landed in empty sectors of the base. From there, the war of words began. Two nations, one event, two entirely different stories. The American government immediately began shaping the public's understanding of the strike. From official press briefings to primetime interviews with defense analysts, the language was consistent and deliberate. This wasn't a reckless act of war, the administration claimed. It was a measured and necessary preemptive action. The goal was to stop Iran from crossing nuclear thresholds, not to provoke a broader conflict. White House officials emphasized several key points. The strikes were precise and carefully targeted to avoid civilian harm. The mission was defensive in nature, aimed at delaying Iran's nuclear capability. There were no civilian casualties and minimal regional fallout. President Trump, always eager to take credit for military strength, called the operation a textbook example of American deterrence. At a rally in Florida, he declared, "We stopped Iran in its tracks. No war, no bloodshed, just strength." That's leadership. American media largely reflected this framing. Major networks like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News aired satellite images showing damage to Iranian facilities with minimal surrounding destruction. Experts pointed to the lack of civilian deaths as proof of restraint and advanced military precision. And yet, not all voices were aligned. Op-eds in The Atlantic, The New York Times, and Foreign Affairs began to surface, questioning whether the strike, while tactically successful, could have long-term strategic costs. What about the lack of congressional approval? Could this lead to another drawn-out Middle Eastern conflict? What about the risk of Iranian proxies escalating across the region? Despite these concerns, the mainstream narrative, at least initially, painted the US as confident, capable, and in control. It was a show of force without a declaration of war. A warning shot, not a campaign. But that was only one version of the story. Inside Iran, the tone was defiant and emotionally charged. State media immediately minimized the impact of the US airstrikes, News anchors and government spokespeople reported that while there was some infrastructure interference, no critical systems had been destroyed and Iran's nuclear program remained intact. Footage emerged of Iranian scientists walking through undamaged hallways, and press tours were given access to carefully selected sections of affected sites. The message was clear: we are still standing. We are still enriching. But the real heart of the Iranian narrative came with their response. Iran's missile attack on Al-Udeid was cast not as revenge, but as strategic retaliation, a necessary act of resistance against American aggression. Government officials praised the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for their rapid, coordinated strike, claiming it as a victory, even though the missiles caused no deaths. In fact, the lack of American casualties wasn't framed as a failure, it was spun as intentional. Iranian media suggested the operation was calibrated to send a message without triggering full-scale war. Military commentators said, "We showed we can hit them anywhere, anytime." But we chose restraint. That's strength. Across Iranian cities, massive crowds gathered for rallies, chanting slogans against the US and Israel. Government billboards went up overnight, showing IRGC generals with fiery backgrounds, flanked by missiles and flags. Terms like martyrdom, resistance, and sovereignty dominated headlines and speeches. It was a classic narrative of David versus Goliath, a proud, sovereign nation standing up to imperialist aggression. But, like the American story, Iran's version of the truth had blind spots. What wasn't emphasized? The significant damage to key parts of Iran's nuclear facilities. Western analysts suggested that Iran's enrichment timeline had been set back by months. Nor did Iranian outlets discuss how many of their missiles were intercepted or how few actually reached their targets. But for Iran's leadership, the facts were secondary to the feeling: strength, defiance, and survival. Both the United States and Iran crafted narratives that emphasized what they wanted their people and the world to believe. What the US downplayed: the long-term risks of a tit-for-tat escalation in a volatile region, the lack of congressional oversight, which some argued violated US war powers, the regional backlash, particularly from countries caught in the crossfire or housing US troops. What Iran downplayed: the real damage to its nuclear infrastructure, which international observers said was far from cosmetic, the ineffectiveness of its missile retaliation, with most being intercepted or missing high-value targets, the risk of overplaying nationalism, especially if future strikes do more lasting damage. In short, both sides told a version of the truth, but each left out the parts that made them look weak, impulsive, or vulnerable. So why does any of this matter? Because this wasn't just a military standoff. It was a clash of stories, a contest for global perception, and a domestic loyalty test. For the United States, the narrative of surgical strength helped reassure allies, project leadership, and avoid looking reckless on the world stage. For Iran, the message of heroic resistance was crucial to bolstering public morale, maintaining regime legitimacy, and reinforcing its identity as a defiant sovereign power standing up to Western intervention. And beneath all of this is a delicate balance. Each side wants to look tough without going to war. That's why the narratives are so carefully managed. That's why language matters. That's why one side says deterrence and the other says resistance. That's why every crater, every satellite photo, every press conference becomes part of a much bigger battle, the one over meaning. In the end, both Washington and Tehran told the stories they needed to tell, for their citizens, their allies, and their enemies. One cast itself as the protector of global order using precision and restraint. The other as the righteous defender of sovereignty, standing tall against foreign domination. But as always in geopolitics, the truth is more complicated than either side admits. So, the next time you hear a missile fired or a strike announced, remember, what happens on the ground is just one part of the conflict. What happens in the story, that's where the real power lies. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which version of the story did you hear first? And what parts do you think were left out? Until next time, stay critical, stay curious, and keep questioning.